we should also promote a lot of entrepreneurs who are taking advantage of all these technology advances that are coming out globally. Either we can grudgingly accept the change or lead that change. And if they fail, actually they become better entrepreneurs. People need to start feeling very comfortable with the fact that everything is risky.
Welcome friends. Today we have with us another amazing personality. He's undoubtedly my role model, as he's very passionate about promoting innovation and entrepreneurship culture within our educational institutes. He's amongst the wealthiest person, self-made businessman in US. And in 2010, then President of US, Barack Obama, appointed him as a co-chair for National Advisory Council dealing with innovation and entrepreneurship. He is one of the key influencers of our decade. He is none other than Deshpande. Desh, sir, welcome to the discussion.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak, everybody.
So, sir, you started your journey from a very small village or a small city in Karnataka, Hubli. And then you went on to become one of the wealthiest person in US. This journey is simply amazing and inspiring, sir. So you must have seen a lot of hits, lot of misses, lot of successes, lot of failure. So what was your biggest success and what was your biggest failure, and how you dealt with both of them?
You know, I think life is full of opportunities for everybody. And whether a problem becomes an opportunity or becomes a problem, all depends on the mindset. You know, it's true that a lot of the students who will be listening to us may not all come from IITs or great institutions. They may be coming from small places. You know, I actually did my 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade education in a little village called Sankeshwar, you know, where most of the people had problems just getting through SSLC. But each one of those things actually become an opportunity to change your perspective. Because life, you know, particularly given situations and what's happening to the world is changing very rapidly. And your ability to adapt to new situations, think about solutions, and being excited about solving problems is what really creates opportunities for each one of us. And so, you know, sometimes we get stuck up in a rat race. We want to do well in this exam, that exam, get into this institution, that institutions. But then essentially you're learning how to play a game that somebody else sets up for you. And that's not a, you know, you may build capabilities, but you don't build your ability to be innovative. So maybe you'll become a good worker. Maybe you can be a good person who can go and support somebody's vision. But if you want to be the leader, if you want to be the person who is driving the change that you want to see in the world, then you cannot play a game where you're constantly chasing to be number one or better than the next person. You have to be creative. You have to be looking at problems and saying, how do I solve this problem? And not necessarily just look for recognition.
So the post-COVID world is now going to be very, very different. So what kind of ideas, according to you, will drive the world in post-COVID crisis?
Well, it's true that this crisis is a deeper crisis, and things are going to change in the world. But you know, the world has been changing pretty rapidly, actually. If you look at just last, you know, most of the students can even see it in the last 10 years, how their lives have changed. You know, they didn't have a mobile phone, now they all have mobile phones. And so things are changing very rapidly. Sometimes what happens is you don't notice the change because you just live it every day. And this is an opportunity where you actually see a very dramatic change. And so when things change, what happens? A lot of things will be done differently. And when things are done differently, each one of us have two options. Either we can grudgingly accept the change or lead that change. And the world predicts that the world is going to change so rapidly that it's going to create lots of opportunities for people who want to create that change. In fact, I think the World Economic Council, I think, said that the world will need about 70 million entrepreneurs, because I think the future is not going to be a company where a company is formed, they'll have thousands and thousands of people and they keep doing the same thing and hold on to the market share, because things are changing. And so I think the future is going to be a few companies that will have maybe 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 employees, but a lot of companies which will have 5, 10, 15, 100, 200, 500 people who will thrive on driving the change. And so, and this opportunity gets accelerated as we go through this COVID. So people, you know, I think each one of us have an option. We can either sit back and say, you know, this is not right, that is not right, this is not the way we did things, and keep complaining about things, or look at a change and say, it doesn't have to be this way. You know, I think it's different, but we can find a better way to live. We can create a better world. And people who look at these problems and get excited about solving them are the main things. So what should students do? They should really focus this opportunity that they have, where they get time to sit back and think about things, to really learn how to become a problem solver, and not necessarily just people who memorize things.
So in this post-COVID world, even priorities of investors are going to change. You are yourself an investor. You are looking at innovation, entrepreneurial ecosystem across the globe. You are monitoring it. How Indian ecosystem is different from a mature ecosystem like Silicon Valley, and whether in this post-COVID world, investors will look at Indian startups?
Well, you know, I think India is a very big part of the economy. There's 1.4 billion people, and a lot of things are going to be happening. And so the opportunity is definitely there everywhere. But what's exciting about India, and why India is such an exciting place for the young people these days, is because there is something a little different than what India was when I left India. I graduated from IIT Madras and left India in 1973, a long time ago. So when I left India, you know, we didn't have technology. So, for example, I did whole computer science at IIT Madras and had never seen a computer before. So we learned computing programming, where the professor gave you a problem and you wrote a program in Fortran saying A is equal to 2, B is equal to 3, C is equal to A plus B, print C. And then we gave the program to the professor, and the professor would mark it up and say syntax error, and we would correct it, give it back to him. And then he would say, yeah, you got it right. So that was the state of the technology we had. Indians had just, you know, gotten the freedom and everything else, and there was not a lot of confidence. There wasn't a lot of pride in India. And the resources were very limited. So the opportunity, it was a very diffident India, diffident set of young people. They were capable, but very diffident. Now, when you look at India, I think about 1% of India, which is what, 14 million people, are globally as competent as anybody else in the world, whether it's accountants or engineers or doctors or legal people. So there is a lot of expertise in India. The gap between technology access, whether you're in a developing country or a developed country, is diminishing. I mean, anything that's in the market in a developed market will become available everywhere else, right? Innovations that happen anywhere in the world, doesn't matter. You don't need a $400 million nanotechnology lab. You know, I've been on the board of MIT now for 20 years, and I see all the complicated stuff that these people do. But all the results that come out of this research are easily available for anybody globally, anywhere in the world. So you have access to expertise, you have access to technology, you have access to all the problems. So, and you can see that in the last 5 years or so, there is a lot of entrepreneurs in India who are actually taking advantage of all these things. So when do investors invest? They invest when you have an entrepreneur that has a great vision of how he sees the future and how he can address that future. So what we need is really, and technology and all these innovations, they all become enablers of that stuff. There'll be, when I graduated in 70s and 80s and so on, most of the opportunities were related to making a technology, better technology. That will still continue, but that was maybe 99% of the high-tech startups. How do you make a computer better? How do you have more memory? How do you make things communicate faster and so on? But now the problem shifted from just creating technology to actually putting technology to use so that you can improve the lives of people in some way, make it cheaper, better, faster, healthier. And so I think what we need entrepreneurs who are visionaries, who can see the future. And it doesn't have to be the same future. India does not need to have the same future as either US or China. It can have its own future. And so we need these great young people who have the bold vision to think about how to make something different and then take advantage of the expertise that we have in India, resources we have in India, and the technology that's continuously becoming available to all of us every year.
So recently, actually, your story published a report about investments in Indian startups. And if you see that report, majority of the investments have gone into either e-commerce kind of startups or logistics kind of startup. Hardly anything in deep tech startups or startups which Indian startups which have capabilities of actually influencing the world or changing the, or creating impact across the globe. So, sir, do you really think that great ideas are coming out of India, or we are still very far?
Well, I think it's beyond doubt that Indians are more than capable of dealing with any technology in the world. I think over the last 4 or 5 decades, when I came here in the 70s, Indians didn't have as much recognition, let's say in US. First they said, oh, maybe you can be a good graduate student. And then they said, oh, maybe you can be a good professor. And then maybe you can be a good head of the department. And then they said, okay, maybe you can be an entrepreneur who has a technical idea. And then they said, oh, okay, maybe you'll make a good CEO. And look at what happened now. I mean, all the major corporations have Indians as the head of the organization. So Indians have shown that they can excel in anything, in technology, in management, in any field. And so I think we need to improve the technology ecosystem in India, and it's happening. In fact, we've launched a program through IIT Madras, through Gopalakrishna Deshpande Center called Incubate. It's more, how do you innovate in a way so that your innovation has more relevance to the world and therefore can have a bigger impact? But it doesn't have to be the same person who does everything. The person who develops the technology, the person who thinks of putting the technology to use, creating the impact, everything else, it can be different people. And we don't need to get hung up that we don't have the most expensive fab in the world. I mean, that technology is available freely to everybody. And the people who invest $10 billion in a fab, they cannot survive unless they supply their technology to everybody in the world. So we have a lot of technology that's available. And so I think we should get good in deep tech, because I think that's the intellectual strength that the country needs. But we should also promote a lot of entrepreneurs who are taking advantage of all these technology advances that are coming out globally and put them to good use.
But sir, then why our startups are failing so rapidly? The success rate of our startups is maybe 1 or 2%. It means 90% of our startups are failing. Vis-a-vis, if you compare with Silicon Valley or even with Israel, their success rate is about 50%. So where we are actually missing, where is the lacuna?
So when does a startup succeed and when does it fail? Every startup has a new idea. There's something that they want to do, which is unproven. So there's always a risk in doing any startup. The question is, does the entrepreneur and the company have a way so that when they start going along a path along which they have a deep conviction and they have to persevere and make sure that they have enough strength and the resources to actually pursue that path? Because you can fail just because you don't have enough resources or you don't put enough into that particular dimension. But the other thing is, not every idea is a good idea. And so if you fail, you want the process where you fail fast and you fail small so that you can pivot and do something else that's meaningful. So in some ways, I'm not that worried about a lot of the failures that you see. Actually, there's a lot of failures in US that don't get written up. It's an ecosystem, it's an experimentation. People have to learn how to think about bold ideas, make commitments to pursue those ideas. And if they fail, actually they become better entrepreneurs the next time. And most of the time when somebody becomes an entrepreneur, it's very, very difficult for them to go work for somebody else. They will be entrepreneurs for life. So typically, thousands and thousands of people have to think about ideas. Some people only get as far as just writing down a business plan or writing down an idea. And then a few people take it to the next step, and a few people get angel investing, a few people get Series A and B and C and public markets. So it's a very narrow window, but the game has to be played by millions of people so that we actually have good ideas emerge. So we should not look at the failure as a failure of a career. Once upon a time when I started, let's say my first company in the 80s in US, entrepreneurship was not common. In fact, in all of Massachusetts, in Boston, there were maybe 5 entrepreneurs. There was Digital Equipment Corporation, DG, Vang. So it wasn't a common place. But now, so what happens is in that case, if you fail, it's a very difficult outcome because, the penalty that you pay for failing is very high. Whereas now, entrepreneurship has become a career. And therefore, if you fail, the question is, why did you fail? If you fail because you don't get up in the morning and go to work and you never put the effort in, then of course it's going to be a disaster. People won't like it. But if you fail because the world changed or the gamble happened to be not the way you thought it would be, then actually you're more like a war veteran. People respect you even more. It's a lot easier to get the funding. It's a lot easier for you to have a bigger vision because now every time, each one of us is afraid of certain things to try. But when we actually try something and then fail in something, our comfort zone broadens. We go through that and say, oh, is this all there is to it? Why was I sweating it out? Why was I so worried about everything? And so your comfort zone broadens, and the people with a very big comfort zone where they're not worried about risk that much, then I think they will have a bigger vision, a bigger idea. And so I think people need to start feeling very comfortable with the fact that everything is risky. In fact, I think my view and my wife's view is that when we left India in 1973, actually we left with $8 in my pocket. And so as long as I have more than $8, I'm ahead of the game. And so, and all the people that are listening to this thing are well educated. They're very fortunate, just like all of us. And so we will never starve. We'll always have food. We'll have always shelter. So what is there to worry about? So the only thing you're trying to optimize in life is are you excited about what you're doing? In my mind, if you have a life where you get up in the morning and you're excited about the day, about whatever it is that you're doing, and you can do it every day of your life, you have it made. And there is nothing more to life than that. But to be able to do that, you cannot be afraid. You cannot be afraid of risk. I think each one of us think that we can insure everything and happily live ever after. It doesn't happen that way. I mean, you could get killed across the board. And so ability to face problems and risks and enjoy solving them is a key attitude that people have to develop so that they will have a happier life, but they also become a lot more useful to the world. And so because constantly they're thinking about how do I make this world a better world?
So you are a well-known investor. And as you are also aware that large number of students in our technical institutes and even non-technical institutes are now taking entrepreneurship very seriously. Whenever I speak to them, they said that they are worried that because they are not from premier institute like IIT or IIM, investors will not take them seriously. You are a key investor. So when you are looking at ideas, are you also looking at background of students or people who are coming and whether they are coming from premier institutes or non-premier institutes? Because that complex is still there in majority of our tier 2, tier 3 college youngsters. And 99% or 99.5% of our students are in these institutes. So how you look at these things?
When investors look at opportunities and funding entrepreneurs, they're not looking at what have they done in terms of following the discipline of studying and just answering questions and so on. They're looking for track record. They're looking for opportunities where this person, he made something happen on his own, not as a part of something else where you just went and volunteered for a couple of hours. In fact, we run a program called LEAD program in Hubli, which we also run in Pune, I think. And so part of that program is that, I think when does somebody's life, when does a nation, when does a community become vibrant? It becomes vibrant when you have most of the people in that community are problem solvers as opposed to complainers. So complainers, why do you have complainers? You have complainers because the problems become chronic, they get deadlocked, and people try a little bit, they cannot solve them, then they feel victimized, they feel helpless, and then they start complaining. So the impoverished communities, impoverished places where people come from these smaller towns and so on, poor guys, I mean, they have a hard life. And so the dominant culture there becomes one of complaining. So, I didn't go to IIT. I don't have this. My father is not rich. I don't have money. It's just one excuse or the other to actually say why they cannot do something, which is all true. But what we try to teach is that, if you fall in love with a problem and you have passion, you think differently. So people should practice that. They should look around the problems and then not necessarily feel oblivious to everything, not like say, oh, this is not my problem, I have nothing to do with this. Then you're not engaging yourself. But if you pick a problem, doesn't matter how big or small the problem is, and then you fall in love with it, then you cannot sleep. You're sort of constantly thinking about it. Doesn't matter whether you're taking a bath or you're exercising, you're eating, that's on your mind. And finally, there's a moment when something clicks and says, I think this will work. And that may still be a wrong idea, but that excitement is there, right? And so once you fall in love with a problem, the way you think about solving a problem is very different. You're not constrained by resources. You're not constrained by what you know. You're not constrained by whom you know. So you can contrast that from solving a problem in a classroom. In fact, all the students right now, that's what they're trained for. What are they trained for? You train them on something, you give them a problem to solve, and if they solve the problem properly, they pass, right? So let's say if a professor comes and teaches Pascal theorem, and he gives him a homework, the student, when he's solving the problem, he's constantly saying, how do I use Pascal theorem to solve the problem? But that's a very constrained thinking. That's not good entrepreneurship. But when he falls in love with a problem that has nothing to do with what a professor has taught, he will use every tool at his disposal. He can Google anything. He can call anybody. He can talk to anybody. If you need resources, okay, go get the resources if you have to. And so once an entrepreneur, a person, develops that attitude of saying, I'm going to solve this problem. I'm not going to be a complainer, sit around and complain things, because those who complain, they'll be complaining for the rest of their life. I mean, it doesn't matter how good an ecosystem you create for them. There's only going to look at what they don't have and not what they have. And so I think in fact, most of the very big entrepreneurs are all like dropouts. They come from small schools. Why? Because they've already shown their ability to survive in environments which are not all greased for them. If you have a world where being an entrepreneur, doing an idea is a total frictionless process, that is not entrepreneurship. The world will not change. In fact, Singapore constantly struggles with it. Singapore is such a well-managed government that they really take care of the community, the students, the teachers, the young people, everything else. But at the same time, they feel like their citizens are missing the entrepreneurship. So they're trying very hard. So I don't think good entrepreneurs should be looking for places where there's zero friction. If there is zero friction, you cannot have. If you're an entrepreneur, you then have to create an opportunity where there is friction and people who are in that frictionless world cannot solve the problem. So I think an entrepreneur always has to be prepared to do something that's difficult to do.
So, sir, let's close down on this very optimistic note. I hope we will create generations of problem solvers, because if India has to emerge as global innovation hub, we really require large number of problem solvers, sir. So thanks for sparing time and talking to us. It was a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Abhay. The students may have a lot of questions. So there is a website called Just Ask Desh, which sort of has a lot of questions and answers. And also it has a small book. It's a very easy to read book. So if people want, they can just go to justaskdash.com and that may answer a lot of the questions that these students may have.
Thank you, sir.